Hi, everyone. My name's Eric. Chris already introduced me. Thank you, Chris. Let's dive right in. So, what I want to talk to y'all today about is discipleship in your testimony. So, a testimony is three things: it's before Christ, with Christ, and after Christ. And I'll dive into what those mean. So, before Christ, it can be before you've met him. And for some, that is, which is great. But it's not for everyone. For example, I grew up in a church. Like Chris said, my parents were married in this church. They grew up here. My grandparents, both sets of my grandparents were in this church. My grandfather on my mom's side was actually the choir director. And then my other grandfather runs a Sunday school class. And then I grew up in this church, and I had all of these people surrounding me, which was amazing. I had so many people just pouring God's love into me. But that kind of gave me a false sense of security in my faith. I felt like I didn't have to work to love God myself. And don't get me wrong, I was so thankful, and I still am so thankful for all those people who poured God's love into me. But kind of what it did is I felt like I didn't have to support myself. And even with all of this love surrounding me, I still developed my trials. I developed anxiety and depression and a few other things that but the good news is this was all before Christ. So when all of this stuff was going on, I ended up going to a treatment boarding school. It's a boarding school mixed with the treatment center, and I ended up being there for a while. A year and a half later, I came home for the summer. But that's my before Christ. So I've talked about before Christ. Now it's with Christ. So with Christ is, it can be when you meet him. And for some that is. But ultimately, it's when a change happens. For a lot of people, the meeting and the change can overlap, but it doesn't for everyone. For me, it was almost 16 years apart. I came home from boarding school for the summer a year and a half later. And what I started to do was I would come to the 9:30 services. My parents would go to the 11 o'clock service. My mom would actually go to a different church because my grandfather was the interim choir director there and needed some help in the choir. And so my mom and my sister would go there, and then so my dad would come to the 11 o'clock service, and I would come to the 9:30 service. I would come earlier myself, drive myself. And I would come up to these altars right here, and I would pray. Almost every week I would pray. It was either because I had either because the worship spoke to me, or the sermon spoke to me, or God was just pulling at my heart to come and pray. And I would pray, and most of the time I would pray because I knew I was missing something. I knew I needed God back in my life. And so I would come down and I would pray and pray and pray to get him back into my life, to have a relationship with him again. And so eventually, so that was when the change happened. So that was my with Christ. Now, after Christ. It's not after you meet him and you leave. That's not what should happen. It's after Christ, after he changes you. And again, it can be after you meet him, but it's not for everyone. So after that, I was coming to church every day, and like Chris was hinting at for some of my stuff, I was teaching Sunday school. I help in Club 345. For those of you who don't know what that is, that's the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade at this church. They meet during the 9:30 service, and I go up and I help teach their Sunday school lesson. And then I go and then from there I go to the youth group. Sometimes I'll teach a lesson. Most of the time I'm just in there learning. And then I have just been a growing member of this church in myself. There's a Bible study Wednesday mornings at 7 that this church does, and I'll go there. It's the Band of Brothers is what we call it. And I'll go there and I'll do a Bible study, and then I'll go to school after that. But ultimately, my after change was, my after Christ was handing over my anxiety and my depression and everything else that I developed. That's his problem now, which is amazing. It's such a powerful feeling to not have to worry about that. And don't get me wrong, it's still there. I still struggle with it. I still struggle to get out of bed some mornings. But I don't have to worry about it. It's not my worry. It's his. And so that is my before and after Christ. Or my before, with, and after Christ. So now I'm going to talk about why you need to know your testimony. So this conference, I asked what I needed to teach about, and I was told this conference had a theme. Does anybody know the theme of this conference? I heard it a couple times, discipleship. So I'm going to read Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 through 20. Does anybody just off the top of their head know what Matthew chapter 28, 16 through 20 is? The Great Commission, yes. So, the Great Commission. Now that the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them, and when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." So to me, the best way to practice discipleship is with your testimony. So I'm going to quote my pastor here real quick. God doesn't ask you to teach what you don't know. Meaning, God doesn't ask you to go to seminary in order to spread his word. You don't have to know the Bible inside and out, front to back. You should. The Bible is a wonderful book, and you need to know every word in there. It is so powerful. But you don't need to know it before you start making disciples, before you go out and spread the word of God. All you need to know is what has happened to you in your life, your testimony. God gives us so many experiences that we can use as a testimony. By the way, I gave this sermon to a youth group 2 Sundays ago. And for this next story, I'm going to talk about what a manual transmission is. And I had to teach a room full of 6th through 12th graders what a manual transmission is. I could probably count on one hand the number of kids that knew what a manual transmission is, and I know at least 2 of them had ridden in my car. But I had a friend. He was driving a manual transmission, and this person never stalled out. Never. And he went up to a stop sign, and he stalled out at the stop sign. And then right as he stalled out, someone ran the stop sign that would have hit him had he not stalled out. I don't know about you, that gives me goosebumps. But that can be an everyday experience if you want it to be. That can be something you forget about by the end of the day or the week. But that is a testimony. That is God working. That can be used to glorify God. So let's say that hypothetically, someone comes up to you right now, and God tells you you need to share your testimony with this person. You need to. I don't care if you think that God is actually telling you, or you think you have too much anxiety, or you think you wouldn't be able to find the words. Do you have a testimony ready to give them? Do you have one built up, ready to spill out onto someone when they need it? If not, that's something you should start thinking about. So now that we've talked about why you need to know your testimony, let's talk about knowing it. The truth is, I can't tell you what your testimony is. I wish I could. It would make your life very easy. It would be hard for me because there are a lot of people here, but the truth is, I can't. But I know someone who can. All you have to do is go home and pray about it. You can go and just pray to God about what experiences you have experienced that are part of your testimony. Just go and pray to God about what your testimony is. Write it down if you want to. Go through it in your head. Tell it to a friend, or the best way to gain experience telling your testimony is to tell it. I didn't know that I didn't have my testimony fully fleshed out until I was writing this. I was writing this and piecing it together, and I realized how much of my testimony I was missing. I had a friend in boarding school a while ago who came up to me, and he asked me, because I was like the Christian in I use quotation marks. There were a few other Christians at my boarding school, but I was known as the Christian. And so someone came up to me and asked me about my faith and about my religion. And he wanted to know which religion was the right one. He didn't know which one to pick. And so I told him my experiences, and I told him about my religion, and I told him that you just need to find the right one and go all in. And I told him, and I tried to convince him the best I could that this was the right one. And I really, really wish that I had my testimony flushed out so that I could have poured that onto him, but I didn't. And I hope that this sermon can be that for you, be that reminder that you need to get your testimony fleshed out before you need it. So many people will have their excuses on why they don't need to know their testimony, or why they don't think they need to share their testimony. Many people might think that their testimony is, I was talking to my dad preparing this, and he was using the word boring, describing some testimonies. Nobody's testimony is boring. And a lot of people might think that their testimony isn't powerful. And I just told you a testimony about someone who has known God their whole life. That was my testimony. I've known God my whole life. I guarantee you every person in here has a testimony that they can give. I don't care how old you are. I don't care if you've been in the church your whole life, you have a testimony. The other excuse that people might have is that they have anxiety. God uses the unqualified. He used Moses, who had a stutter, David, who was just a kid, Paul, who prosecuted believers. There are so many more that I could list. It would take me forever to list all of the unqualified people that God uses. I'm going to list one more. He uses a high schooler with social anxiety in front of a room of about 800 people. If I can get up and talk in front of this many people and have social anxiety, you can share your testimony with one person. I'll leave you with one final thought. To someone who has never known God before, who has never been a believer, what is more powerful? A story of how God has shared and worked in your life, or some words from some book they don't yet know to be true? Thank you.